And of course, today we're going to be talking about HR data and insights. There will be a QR code that arrives on your screen, which you can click on with your phones and access the white paper which we're going to be talking about today. It's completely free to download and gives a lot of the data to the conversation we're going to be running through with both Jan and Fiona. Of course, the really important thing today is to talk about the rise and significance of evidence-based HR and predictive data analytics, a really hot topic in the world of HR and payroll at the moment. And we hope by the end of the session, all of you will be in a position to create a winning business case for HR and payroll strategic investment plans. Now, brief introductions. My name is Nick Day. I'm the host of the HR L&D podcast and the payroll podcast. I run a recruitment business called JGA Recruitment, which specializes in payroll and HR recruitment. And I'm a Reward 300 member as well. And I also host Payroll Question Time, which is also in association with SD Works. That's enough about me. Let me introduce you to our wonderful panel that we have with us today. Moving from my left to right, Jan, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yes, good morning. My name is Jan Laurijsen. I'm based in Belgium for SD Works. I'm a senior researcher and public speaker for SD Works. I'm also partnered with the University of Antwerp, where I do my own research. And we have been collaborating also for more than 13 years with the Antwerp Management School, researching careers and the use of data. And I'm very excited to be here today, Nick.
Fantastic. Excited to have you, Jan, as always. I'm moving from left to right. Fiona, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, I'm Fiona. I work for an organisation called AG Bar. I look after the HR operations and OD team there, which includes payroll and people analytics, hence me being on the call today. I've been in AG Bar for 3 years. We're a soft drinks manufacturer mainly. We do have other brands that come under us, but we're mainly known for producing Iron Brew in Scotland and Rubicon in the south as well. So mainly a UK based organisation, and we have about 1,000 people across the UK.
Fantastic. Now, to give everyone a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to be talking about the benefits of an evidence-based HR for your organisation, how data shapes business planning and conquers challenges, the journey to data maturity and how to achieve it, advice on creating a winning business case for HR and payroll strategic investment plans, and real-life examples, in particular, as Fiona just mentioned, of how AG Bar implemented data-driven HR strategies. As Jan says in the white paper itself, it's all about evidence-based HR. So let's dive into that. Of course, the white paper, which you can download, and the QR code is on front of your screens at the moment, is titled Inside Information, How to Unlock the Power of Your HR Data. And you'll find in that report that most organizations, in fact 91%, make use of various HR data sources, with the most common being absence data and working time data, which are both 44%, general personnel data, 40%, training, 39%, and performance and evaluation data making up 37%. So it leads me to you, Jan. Can you tell us a little bit about the evolution of HR data usage, specifically in relation to transitioning from issue identification to predictive analytics?
Yeah, I think that a lot of what we talked about evidence-based HR, and obviously we advocate very much the idea of using science, stakeholder data, using also expertise data, but also your own organizational data. And I think if you look at maturity models, like for instance proposed by John Boudreau, looking at an evolution from metrics at first, where a lot of you probably have been busy with gathering the data, looking at some basic KPIs, looking at metrics, possibly doing some benchmarking to get an idea of where we are and what we're trying to do with HR. In the end, people analytics, HR data are all there to make better decisions on the people side of the business, and moving up towards HR maturity, but also in added value towards the organization. I think the next step that we could take is to do analytics, where probably Fiona also has some experience, where we can look at correlations or even causal relationships between the data. For instance, looking at correlations between absenteeism data and working conditions, for instance, that might be very interesting. And of course, with the upcoming of AI and new tools, more and more we're looking at predictive analytics, from looking at predicting what's going to happen or where we should be looking at in moving towards, for instance, absenteeism, what's going to happen over the course of the next years, but also in terms of talent shortages or talent sourcing, looking at how we can predict and act better on that. And of course, in the last stage, it's about prescriptive, where the tools will be telling us what to do. I don't think that we're there yet, but there are some interesting experiments where tools are actually telling organizations where they should invest, for instance, in their talent supply chain. So I think that all organizations now are busy in some way or are trying to find out what analytics can mean in terms of value for the organization. And it does help to find out where you're at in this maturity model on metrics, analytics, predictive or prescriptive analytics. That's, I think,
Fantastic.
most importantly as a kickoff for this meeting.
So Fiona, I know during the course of today, we're going to find out some of the benefits that this analytic data has done for your business. Before we even get to that point, what was the thing that pushed the needle for you, that started the journey for you, the motivation to evolve the way that you're using HR data?
Yeah, initially for us, it was actually about looking at where our master data sat within the organisation and using our HRE system as the base of that, and then all other systems feeding in. And we actually went through quite an extensive journey a few years ago to get to a point where all data fed into one place, meaning when we now look at analytics and using an analytics module to help with some of that, it's all sitting there and it does all correlate, and you can piece together a better insight from that, as opposed to just being sporadic data that you can pick up in different formats in different places. So we've actually come quite far where our time and attendance data feeds into our absence data, feeds into, you know, other correlating factors that all come together in the one place, and that really does drive better insight and decision making for us now.
Fantastic. There's a lot of sort of joining the dots a little bit. So Jan, what can we suggest then to help HR leaders to understand the gap between their perceived and actual data expertise in organizations?
Well, it's like Fiona said, I think it's first of all about the quality of the data. Like, can we have an assessment with some technical people and data scientists about understanding where the data are and what's the quality of the data? I think that's the first step, is very important, because otherwise anything in HR, any HR question, well, the data will only answer the questions you ask them, and the answer will just be as good as the quality of the data. So that's one thing. The second thing is, Fiona also referred to that, where are they? If they're good, if they're any good, where are they? And can we bring them together? Because that's often the case in organizations. Where are the data and can we bring them together? Because they often aren't. Payroll data are not, like Fiona said, payroll data are maybe not in the same place whereas time and attendance data or absenteeism data are. So technology has evolved, and especially with cloud data warehousing, there are quite some solutions that help us to bring together those data and better understand what we have in-house. And then last but not least, like I said, the question that you ask, the data will only answer the question that you ask. So the better the question, the better we understand what the HR challenges are in your organization, the better question the data, you can find out where you're at. So it goes both ways. It's about the data at first and understanding where they are and what the quality is. And on the other hand, it's about understanding exactly what the big challenges are for your organization, so you can bring them together using tooling as it is beforehand at the moment in a lot of organizations.
We've seen HR and payroll systems evolve considerably in quite a rapid time frame. I don't know about yourself, Fiona, but did you find that when you were looking at your own systems, actually there was data there that you never even knew it could pull reports on? Like, sometimes we don't configure it, we just do it to process payroll, or we do it to find the things we're very used to looking at before, but the way we did things before won't necessarily get us to where we want to get to. Did you discover, Fiona, in your journey that actually I never knew that we had access to certain elements of data and you were able to utilize that?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things, if I can give you an example of, is we used to look at certain things that we thought were important just because we could measure it on a spreadsheet. So we had pockets of people across different functions measuring people data. But when you actually dug into that a little bit, well, are you using 100 different measures on people just because you can? What are you doing with it? What action is it driving? And is it really telling you anything that you need to know? And actually, we took an approach where by having everything centralized in one system, we chose a few key measures instead, a few key performance indicators only, but dove into that further. So again, if I can share an example, absence is a very basic HR measurement. We are used to measuring that in most organizations, but by diving into that further and looking at more insight, it's about reasons, pockets of patterns that we can see, what we can actually do to step in and support on a proactive basis forecasting what might be coming down the line at a certain point of the year, as opposed to just 100 different measures that weren't really driving any action. So for us, it was stripping it back to more basics, believe it or not, but doing more with it and driving more insight from that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was speaking to a payroll manager quite recently who had been tasked with looking at some of the benefits data and analysing the benefits data and benefits utilisation in particular. And they realised that some of the benefits weren't being utilised at all, and at huge cost to the business. So it wasn't driving the actions they wanted, which was to improve the well-being and experience of the employee, because the employees weren't using it. All it was doing was actually adding a cost to the bottom line, which could have been invested elsewhere. But no one had really considered checking the utilization aspects of that benefit as one example. Sorry, Anne, you're going to say.
And the other, I think that's very important, a very important thing. And also the other way around, I don't know how it works with AG Bar, Fiona, but we also have to realize that a lot of the people data don't sit with HR. There are also data sitting with finance, there are data sitting with facilities, there are data sitting with well-being, with health and safety, and so on and so on. So we have to consider very well what is actually the data that we can use and that we want to use. And I very much support the idea that Fiona said, was that let's focus on some essentials first before we start using all sorts of metrics. And that's also very important. And that also helps to see, that's also a word that you used, Fiona, evolution. We also see there's a lot of benefit in looking back into your data, going back to 5 years and finding evolutions, seeing also using statistical analysis and so on to see what is going on and to find the patterns that actually matter for your people decisions.
Sure. Let's dive into that then for a second with you, Fiona. Based on some of the key KPIs that you did start to analyse, what were some of the tangible benefits that you discovered during your own work and your own investigation and evolution, as Anne mentions?
So I can pull out a couple of examples for you. If I talk about the kind of end-to-end data set, it follows now the employee life cycle. So for example, the first part of our people strategy is about spark my curiosity. So are we actually capturing your interest to come and work for this organisation? And the key metrics that we have in place there are around more externally sourcing factors like, you know, employer brand and, you know, LinkedIn metrics and so on. It then goes into more of the life cycle, as you can imagine, so key performance data, you know, the basics that we've spoken about in terms of turnover and so on, right through to that offboarding. So where are we on exit interview feedback? What is our turnover? What are the statistics telling us there? But for us, by focusing on that and splitting that up into a few key sections of the life cycle, we can then drill in on a regular basis on key topics. So if I stick with the absence one that I provided you with earlier, obviously that's driven through time and attendance, through to absence metrics, and then we drill into insight. And the key part for us there is, so what does that mean? And what action are we recommending on the back of that? And a very basic one for us that's been really key is, okay, so we understand that there's a problem with this type of absence or that type of absence, but we're also seeing that that doesn't correlate to our occupational health support or our wellbeing support. And we were very quickly able to analyse that and put in place a measure to say, how do we actually make sure we step in early and support? And for us, we're seeing the benefit of tangible action on the back of measuring something, whereas before we were measuring a lot, but not really getting to the action and a key output, for example, with some value add.
That's a really good example. I think it shows that there's no point measuring anything, as Jan said, unless you're willing to act upon it and actually, utilize the results to make change. What I'd like to do, we've got obviously the attendees, I'm assuming, joining us today are either immersed in HR data, want to utilize their data more effectively, or have an interest in this subject. So I'd like to get their involvement here. I'm going to run our first poll just to get a bit of an understanding in terms of where they are in their own HR journey. So if you don't mind joining us, if you are an attendee into this poll today, the question is, what level of data utilization do you believe your organization currently stands at? And as Jan says, this is very much for everyone a bit of an evolution as you start to undertake this journey. But the options here are beginning to explore, akin to persona 1 or 2 if you've got your case studies downloaded, your white papers downloaded, moderately advanced, which is akin to persona number 3, or highly advanced, which is akin to persona 4. Just to give you all some reassurance, we will be talking about what those personas mean a little bit later on during the show. So if you haven't had a chance to download that white paper yet, don't worry, we'll delve into that in a little bit more detail. We're just going to run that poll with the attendees. Once we've got some results, I'll probably ask Jan and or Fiona to just comment on the results. Have we had a chance to get any results in on this poll yet? So we're looking. While we're waiting for those to come in, we're going to talk about as well overcoming roadblocks in utilizing HR data next. But here we've got beginning to explore and moderately advanced. No one at highly advanced yet. What are your thoughts on those responses, Jan?
Well, I think I don't know how many responses there are exactly, but it also reflects a bit what we've been researching over the last couple of years. There's a lot of interest. I think that we are moving there. A lot of organizations are moving in there, beginning to explore or getting advanced. The ones that are actually highly advanced, there are but a few that actually investment in their own people analytics teams. So I think it reflects more or less what's going on in the market, and that everybody's looking also across different industries where to start and what to do. So I'm not surprised, really. I think it's a quite good reflection of what's going on in the market at the moment.
Good. Well, let's take the talk forward then into how we overcome some of the roadblocks that may exist when it comes to utilizing HR data. In the white paper, that it says there are several factors that deter organizations from taking full advantage of potential HR data. And according to the white paper, 27% believe there's no need to get involved, whereas 1 in 5, which was 20%, point to a lack of time or manpower. 17% say a lack of systems is holding them back. And other common challenges that they found included insufficient knowledge to interpret data or make analysis, which was 11%, and being unable to bring together data sources, which was 9%, which is something that's seen as a bigger issue by larger companies. If we bear that in mind, I'll come to you, Fiona. What are some of the common challenges that you were faced with when you wanted to leverage your HR data more effectively? And are any sort of tips for overcoming those?
I think one of the challenges, I guess the main ones you've highlighted there from the white paper around time, resource, actually setting that thinking time aside to change the way you do things currently or try and implement something new is hard. We're all busy, we've all got day jobs, and this is one more thing that you add to that. In terms of how we overcame that, it really was about investing in systems and making sure that there was that master data source, and that actually saved us time down the line because everything was then in one place. One of the biggest obstacles though that we faced with that was actually pulling some of the data measuring away from those other functions. So believe it or not, those other functions were quite wedded to what I measure my own people data, and I measure all of these things, and you're asking me now to change that and that it potentially sits centrally somewhere and that you're measuring less. How does that work? So it was actually getting those people on board and demonstrating where the measuring of the data actually added value and what we were going to do with that. And actually over time, we were going to develop the systems and the tools that they could still measure that on a local basis, but it was automated and real time and sleeker with more insight. So it was about selling the longer term benefits to change that kind of short term behaviour and practice, if you like. That was a real obstacle for us.
I can see Jan doing lots of head nodding as well as you were talking. He's obviously in agreement with you, Jan. So just to remind the audience, if you have any questions here, if you've come up with any roadblocks in your own organisations, a great opportunity to put them in the questions box, and we can maybe ask Jan and Fiona how they would tackle those problems. If you do have any, please do put them in the chat box. But Jan, you're nodding your head. Tell us your thoughts.
Well, I think that Fiona was absolutely right. I think it's a long-term project, so you have to find out what the business case, what the added value is for the organizations. That's in the first place there, and making clear to the organization and your stakeholders what it is that you actually, what the problems are or the challenges that they face that you may help them to solve using analytics. That's the first thing. So you would have to explain, secondly, what analytics are. Now, the good thing is that often in your organization, you might already have people that are more mature or advanced in using analytics, like for instance, the finance department, or if you have a production site, you might also find people that are already quite ahead, and you might find partners in there to actually help you with that struggle or with that crusade to get people analytics done. But I think one of the most important things is also that what Fiona referred also to is that you have to get the people in the HR department on board. I think there is a lack of knowledge, but also some reluctance to actually onboard on this because it's quite unknown territory. So we're going to have to educate people and make them understand. Whenever I give a lecture at university, I said to the students in their last years, I tell them, pick up your statistics manual again and find out what's going on, because that's what you going to need if you want to start in a function in HR. So the HR function as such is changing a lot. And as Dave Ulrich already mentioned also, we're going to need something of a new function in the organization, which is called the analytics designer or interpreter. So we're going to actually have people move towards these new kind of functions, because as long as we also, and the more that we are also finding efficiency in automating processes of HR is going to have to demonstrate its value, its added value for the organization. And ironically enough, by using data, we actually might demonstrate the human value of HR.
Sure. I think that's an interesting thing to consider there then, because absolutely right. I think businesses now are understanding the efficiency savings, the value that can be gained from really getting deep into the data as you evolve in it with your HR data strategy, and the benefits it can bring to the bottom line of any business, right? Which is what your C-suite are looking for, is how to improve the profitability of your company and the wellness of your staff and things like that. So to throw a spanner in the works then, should we be developing that talent in-house? You talked about potentially bringing an analytics specialist or developer, Jan, words you used, or should we look to, outsource that expertise where we've got, we know there are specialist consultancies and people out there that can do this and specialize in this area. Obviously, there's a cost involved, but if we know that 27% of them said that they don't think it's their role, 20% didn't have the manpower, resource, or time, is outsourcing an option? Fiona, let me start with you. I'll come to you, Jan.
I think it depends on the organisation, size, scale, complexity all come into that. So unless you're a very large organisation that has the luxury of having large people analytics teams, you're probably going to need to outsource a certain aspect of it. But equally, depending on your structure, you could make that part of someone's role. So if you've got someone that's got a real specialism in that already, an interest, a natural flair, that's something that you could develop with that person with some external support. Or to Jan's point earlier, where you might have partners in the business that are already quite strong in data management and insight, or other analysts that you could partner them up with to leverage that skill set. It is ultimately a data analyst skill set if you're talking in that example, but albeit with people data. And so there are a number of ways that you could develop that, but I think the point is very valid, that this is a skill set for the future and something that as HR functions we definitely need to embrace more and more.
Yeah. We recognise we need it. It's how do we get it? So Jan, what would your response be to that question?
Yeah, I think we did research over the last couple of years also with HR specialists across Europe, and I think that this is particular one field of HR that a lot of them are looking to help to find solutions in outsourcing, because it is a very particular trade of working with data as such, using the analytics, using the statistics. So I think, as Fiona mentioned, unless you're a very large organization, you're going to actually build it up because you already have the infrastructure, the data infrastructure also for other functions to do it. I think a lot of organizations are actually looking at this partner that can help them with building this idea, both of exploiting the data, bringing them together and making sense of them. Having said this, I also believe that, what Fiona said as well, we're going to have to build the competence to interpret the data in HR internally, because otherwise you will just get back analysis and nobody knows what it means. I mean, that's maybe taken too far, but it would require a lot of knowledge and expertise to interpret what has been analyzed. It's a bit like with payroll, Nick. I mean, payroll is getting more and more complex and automated, but which also means that you need payroll advisors that get more and more competent in understanding what the tooling does, because otherwise no one can interpret what's coming out.
Yeah, and it's, as you say, if you can't interpret it, you can't gain the value from it. So I mean, we're a small group here. The three of us, I think, are all converts to understanding the value of data analytics. That it's a place we should be investing in. It's something we should be looking to evolve within our organizations because of the benefits it can bring. And hopefully those attending today are of the same mindset as well. We don't know. But let's say that we want to make change, we want to involve our HR analytics, but actually the C-suite aren't convinced. For them, it might be another investment they don't need to make. It's already working. Why try and fix something that's already working? And so you're going to get some potentially some resistance from stakeholders and C-suite. Are there any tips? Perhaps I'll come to you first, Fiona, because you've gone through this journey, for crafting a compelling narrative or showcasing potential value that's really helped you to get stakeholder buy-in?
Yes, so for us really it was about, sorry, I'm just trying to get my light working behind me, there we go, so I can see, or you can see me and hear me at the same time. For us, really, I guess our ask initially was, you know, they looked at our function and said, we want to get more out of our data, but we don't really know what and how. So almost they knew there was a need, but they didn't really know the benefits. So we already had buy-in to go and explore this area of work, which was a good position to be in. But ultimately we had to then say, right, if we're going to invest X, Y, and Z, what are we going to get out of it? And for us, it was really about, you know, streamlining what was actually hours and hours of work elsewhere. So when we added up how many hours were spent analysing data across the business, it was actually quite a lot. And for quite a small investment into the right systems, we were going to get a huge amount of time saved. And also real-time data was the other key factor for us selling the benefits. So when we went into that process previously of mining all this data, not really driving much insight from it, and looking at how long it took to get to the point of actually looking at that, it was quite delayed, between 4 and 6 weeks delayed. But if you invest in the right tools, you've actually got real-time data that you're analysing in a timely manner, and therefore when you're driving insight and action, it's relevant, it's current, it's right now, and it's actually forecasting ahead and preventing a problem, as opposed to just looking at data of a problem that happened, say, a couple of months ago. So there was a real-time aspect for us that really sold the benefits, as well as the saving of all of the running of spreadsheets and all of the man hours that go into mining data in a really manual way.
Sure, so that's a great way of putting it. What about yourself, Jan? Any experience in your research that have shown you good ways to create a compelling narrative for why this should be something that stakeholders listen to and buy into?
Yeah, I think Fiona mentioned two very important ones with, for instance, looking at it in as she said, timeliness and so on, in-time data, very important. I think one of the key elements is, or the key element is also to actually bring it back to the core strategic challenges that any organization faces. And at the moment, I can say that across Europe, organizations are facing problems with finding people, keeping people, and making sure that they don't get sick. So basically, if you tie that back to data, you get back to absenteeism figures, turnover figures, and recruitment figures. So basically, your talent supply chain or your personnel life cycle. If we can bring data to life there and making sure that we understand why people are leaving, when they are leaving, when they get sick, when they want to join us, when they are changing jobs, then I think it becomes very obvious that we are contributing to the core challenges of our organization, which is staffing basically. And there we can actually make a difference. If then we can actually find the right metrics or the right analytics, illustrate that, if we can then show this, that it's very timely to do that, that we don't have, that we can do this in real time, I think it becomes very clear what is going to happen. And finally, I think we should look at this as an investment. There is a cost involved, but we should look at an investment to make HR a more powerful organism within the organization. Like I said, to take better decisions on the people side of the business. That may cost something, but that also generates value.
Sure. I'm still reading from the lens that I look through, which is a recruitment one, right? That one of the biggest challenges HR directors face right now, and Fiona may not agree in AG Bar, but is still the attraction and retention of staff. It's still an ongoing challenge across different departments. And we know now with the Great Resignation that if we don't get that bit right, if we're not looking at the data to understand it, then employees will go elsewhere. And actually they have a lot more power now, perhaps they did a decade ago, to make those choices, with lots of competitors offering different ways of looking after their staff that goes beyond just remuneration. And I think the data can give us some really, really good insights as to how we can make better use of creating an environment that really speaks to our employees and allows them to want to work for you and stay with you.
Yeah, and if we elaborate on that, the whole idea, I don't know, Fiona, if you're working with this already, but I mean, tooling is there to also create ideas and insights on how people's careers are evolving, when they are making changes, possibly why they are making changes. If we then think about the power of AI, for instance, how we can make suggestions to their managers to say, it's about time that you start talking to Nick because he's been doing this job for 3 years. Possibly a lot of people in that kind of function tend to change jobs at that time. So why don't you start that career talk now? So lots of things we can do to stimulate both recruitment and retention. In onboarding, same thing. Organizations are experimenting with data and survival analysis techniques to see, okay, what's the point where in the onboarding process we make a difference so that people eventually decide after a couple of months, to stay for a longer period of time. And those are really powerful analysis, I think, that will become more and more important in the near future.
And of course, if we're dealing with stakeholders, they're interested in bottom line, and happy employees predominantly are productive employees. And that's also worth knowing, right? We produce more, we work harder when we're happy where we are. So lots of things to think about there. So hopefully we've created a good case for the listeners now and those watching that you know, the importance of utilizing HR data. Hopefully we've talked about how to overcome some of those roadblocks and how to get the buy-in from our stakeholders. Let's talk a little bit about how we can start the data discovery journey then and what that involves. Because we know and we've established that business needs someone probably specific to analyze the data, but we've also established it can be quite a big investment to do that ourselves, particularly if we're working in the head of HR as Fiona is, and you've got lots of other things pulling you in different directions and your plate's spinning a lot of the time. And that's why you mentioned some organizations, particularly sort of SMEs, may look to utilizing an external partner to do that. But if I'm an HR leader and I'm watching this right now, where do I start my data discovery journey? And what, I guess, what would be the first things I should be considering if I'm about to sort of set and start scoping for my initial data project? Let me start with yourself this time, Jan.
I think we already had a glimpse of that earlier in the discussion. Start with where data are being processed anyway, because those are the data sources that you would be primarily looking at, apart from the questions that you want to ask or the analysis you want to make. But definitely payroll data is one clear example of those data are sitting there. So what can we do with it? You refer to yourself anything that is reward data to a broader extent than just payroll. Time and attendance data might be very interesting. Absenteeism data, wherever they are. So I think it starts with acknowledging what there already is, where data are processed, where they are not necessarily exploited for analytical purposes, but where they are sitting anyway. And they are sitting in any of your core HR processes.
And all little pots of gold, I guess, if you use correctly. How about yourself, Fiona? Anything you would add to that?
Yes, I agree with everything there. I think the first place you want to really start is what problem is it you're trying to solve? So what are we trying to get out of this exercise, and what does good look like at the end? So what are we trying to move the dial on, if anything? And once you get that clear, when you're then mining in those different pieces of data like were outlined there, you know what you're then trying to achieve, and on the back of that perhaps pick a few things and set some key improvement metrics for yourself. So, you know, don't try and tackle everything at once, but for us it's been really helpful to look across the life cycle, pick some key top line measures, and then look at the other areas in more detail as required.
Super. I mean, Jan mentioned, for example, starting with the payroll department, and that obviously involves some cross collaboration and working with others to support your data initiatives. Fiona, did you find you had to sort of curry favor with some of your departmental colleagues that are, you know, perhaps have got their own challenges and time constraints as well, and get them involved? Were there any challenges you faced there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did this project at the same time as implementing a new time and attendance system.
Wow.
Removing sort of sporadic holiday management systems that people use locally as well as other things. So we had quite a large scale project going on that involved every function and smaller function of that function within our business. So we had quite extensive project team meetings. It was a big behavioural shift in some places to get people onto a system or using a different system. And then obviously data and reporting came on the back of that. I would say that it was quite a task, and it was quite an investment in relationships and project meetings and setting up new ways of working and training. But now we're really seeing the fruits of that labour, where, you know, we're all on one KPI set, we're all on one set of reporting, and actually a lot of time has been freed up from that. So it was definitely worthwhile investing in the relationships and the buy-in up front.
Excellent, it's a great example. And Jan, how about yourself? Is there anything that you would add to that in terms of the cross collaboration piece you've seen in your research? You mentioned payroll earlier, time and attendance, maybe we're covering the same ground. But I guess one challenge you may have if you are cross collaborating then is making sure you've all got a unified language when it comes to data terminology. So it'd be interesting to understand what your research discovered on that side, Jan.
Well, I think that research is not entirely maybe compelling evidence in that way, but what we know from experience also is that we need to get a common understanding of what data are and make people understand, first of all, that it's not their data. right? So it is not their data, it's the company's data. The second thing is that fortunately technology has evolved a lot, especially in cloud data warehousing, so that we don't have to transfer data anymore. We just pull them in one cloud data warehouse, so we can start exploiting it and actually using it for the benefit of the organization. So there, I think that is the most important thing, is that we convince people that it's not a cumbersome process anymore in a technical way, because there's lots of technology that can help us. They do, however, have to understand that it's not their data that but it's the organization's data that we're going to try to make more transparent and make more exploitable. And that often is the case because people are sitting on their data, like you said, for instance, on payroll. And of course, there are all sorts of arguments in privacy and what have you. We need to overcome that. We need to ensure that there's no problems, of course, but at the same time, a lot of things can be done. The convincing is mainly also about people's position and how they control the data. So that's becoming a more and more important challenge, also looking at the transformational process and changing people's minds towards what we actually can do with the data.
Sure. I know that for those that have downloaded the white paper, it does break it down into 5 manageable steps for beginning your journey. It starts with crafting a story beyond the figures, so creating a clear and simple narrative around why data analytics is relevant and what the business is trying to achieve and who will benefit. 2 was determining the scope, so asking which aspects of your workforce sort of influence the business, picking well-defined topics to explore, which much what Fiona did, actually sort of less is more sometimes, but utilizing exactly what it is we want to achieve and making it simpler. Building bridges, of course, so as we just mentioned there, Jan and Fiona, sort of getting cross-collaboration, other stakeholders involved, IT, finance, payroll, ops, legal, and whoever it might be that can support your data projects in the future. Mapping out the data sources, again, something that Jan's focused on, identifying the sources from which you'll be pulling your data, which of course could be from different departments, but also in different formats. So Excel, Google Sheets, CRM, depending on what systems you're using. So bringing those things together, and of course, creating a common understanding of data, which was number 5. So things to think about were whether or not you want to include analysis or action-orientated suggestions or both, whether to focus on people as a whole rather than just HR, and whether reports need to be customized for a particular business or whether standard reports will be sufficient. Beyond those sort of 5 manageable steps, Fiona, anything you would add to that, or anything that you think that may support our listeners today to really help them along their journey?
I know it's probably been covered already, but one of the key things for us, I guess a couple of builds to think about would be, as you are collaborating, all of these people will still need to do something with that data potentially. So there might be a further aspect of training or upskilling involved. So it might not be that they're mining the data, but they might be doing something with that, or presenting that in their own format, or talking about that in another forum. So I think there is always an aspect of further upskilling before your immediate HR colleagues, for example. I think the other thing to think about, and that organisations need to be thinking about when they're developing data platforms, tools, packs, is about accessibility needs. So, and this is something I would say that a lot of people are quite early in the journey on. So who is the receiver of that data? How might they need to pick things up, read things, digest things? And that can be different depending on the person, the end user ultimately. And we need to be thinking, as the people who are presenting that data, how accessible is that, how inclusive is that, and what tools are out there that might support that as well.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah. I'm going to ask Jan to continue with that, because I know he's got some points he'd like to add to it as well. Before we do, I'm going to run our poll, because we can ask that question, Jan, and get your thoughts just as we're running the last poll, which is, what do you see as the primary challenge in initiating a data discovery journey in your organisation? Is it gaining stakeholder buy-in, determining the project scope, bridging interdepartmental gaps, mapping out reliable data sources, or establishing a common data terminology? So while our audience is answering that poll, Jan, I wonder if you can just add your thoughts on, to follow on from Fiona's response there, about other things perhaps people may want to consider that we haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think it's very important what Fiona refers to. We've been doing quite some workshop. I've been doing quite some workshop with some of our clients where we start a journey, actually. And the most important thing that we try to do in the first workshop is to try to understand how the data, if the data are available, and how they might answer a question. So we distinguish between do you have a suspicion that you want to see confirmed? Do you have a question, a particular question that you want to ask the data? Or even better, do you have a hypothesis that you want to see rejected? So from there, we can help actually the mutual understanding between the data analyst and the HR people to get the idea of like, okay, what is the type of questions that we want to ask, or what suspicions do we have, which is very interesting for people from a data point of view who are not necessarily in the HR business to understand, okay, that's where they want to take it. And vice versa, it means that HR people will also get an understanding of, okay, so the data are there or they aren't there, and what is the type of question that we can expect. This is, I think, very important as we take this further and you want to do some implementation before you're going to actually choose tools, that we have a mutual understanding of how the data might help to confirm or reject our suspicions, questions, or hypotheses to start the project.
Fantastic. And interestingly, if we close that poll, we just sort of covered some of these points, but it looks like, albeit it's a small case study here, but 50% came back saying that mapping out reliable data sources was their biggest challenge in initiating a data discovery journey. And 50% said establishing a common data terminology is their biggest challenge, which hopefully we've covered and supported you a little bit during the course of this webinar so far. But we're going to actually dive into that a little bit more now as we carry on through today's show, because we'd like to sort of tackle how we can identify and leverage data personas. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with these, they are available in the white paper, but don't worry if you haven't downloaded it yet, we will run through those during the course of today's show as well. It was actually quite nice to read it, the white paper, because I saw my own name quoted in the report, which I wasn't aware of until I read it. So it said that, what I quote myself, so one small identification of a data anomaly, perhaps you're offering people a benefit, which I mentioned earlier, that isn't being used to its full potential. It can help to keep your employees engaged at work, and those small shifts can have a huge impact on staff retention and ultimately on bottom line performance. And I still think that's absolutely true. I think the SD Works white paper has given us 4 personas to run through. We've got the pragmatic problem solver, the evidence-seeking detective, the insights wizard, and the master strategist. I wonder, Jan, if you could talk us through each of those, including the attributes and capabilities that may be associated with each.
Well, like you said in the beginning, Nick, I think these persona relate very much to the maturity model that I explained in the beginning of the session. We're looking at, okay, first of all, yeah, the pragmatic problem solver is just looking for data, is looking for basic metrics to understand the problem better or to support an idea and finding out where those data are. So plain facts and figures about core domains, I mean, those are the essential things that you want to reflect to. The evidence-seeking detective is already a bit ahead in the game, may know already more about the data, and as Fiona pointed out earlier, is more aware of the problem or the question that needs resolving. So when the question is clear, then it also means that we can go find the data where they're at and finding the different sources of evidence that may help us to understand where it's taking us. Basically, this is somewhere in the metrics and the analytics phase of the maturity model. But then moving on to the insights wizard, there we have someone that is already quite to grips with tooling and the possibilities, and probably already working in an environment where quite some of the data are exploitable and have been analyzed already, and they can actually use their statistical skills to do more with data that are actually there. So they can actually use the existing sources, the metrics that you have, to actually do something more, like I said, like correlational analysis or causal connections and so on and so on. The master strategist is highly competent in terms of HR data and analytics and can tackle strategic human issues. I think here we're actually looking at people that are both very, very much into data, the possibilities of the tooling, but also the understanding of strategic human resource problems in organizations, so they can actually pull together new insights or new conclusions about how to conduct the business in the next coming years. So very much a strategic position and much more related already to the predictive and possibly the prescriptive possibilities of analytics for the upcoming years. So they relate to different stages of maturity in analytics anyway, and it means that it relates very much to that person, being it an HR person, being it an external person, helping you with particular questions of a more, let's say, practical nature up to a strategic nature.
Fantastic. So, Phil, I have to ask, from these personas, which ones resonate with you? Have you seen yourself move through these different personas, and would you consider yourself a master strategist yet? Or indeed, if it's not you, is there someone in your business that perhaps embodies that persona for now?
So I would love to say yes, but I would say we're probably sitting somewhere around insights with the hope to be more strategic. So we've definitely moved through the personas, and we are much further on now than we were, say, 3 years ago. But it's definitely about, you know, playing the long game. I would say that one of the key next steps for us really is about using our data to empower decision making beyond the HR team. So without us just mining it, owning it, trying to use it and leverage all of that, the next stage for us is really how do we delegate the ownership and the decision making from that data to people leaders, and that's probably a key next step for us.
Yeah, fantastic. I like. Sorry, go on, then.
No, would you agree, Fiona, that you will become a master strategist some point, but it depends a lot on the team that you assemble and the complementarity of the different competence that you'll be needing?
Absolutely, yes. And I think also your executive team as well, how they view people analytics and data and how they speak about it. We are very fortunate to have an exco that are very interested in this area, that review it and, you know, look at our insights and listen to our recommended actions on a regular basis, and review our top level people KPIs as well on a regular basis. And I think that's critical to get into that strategic space.
I have to say, from a recruitment perspective, we've seen a huge amount of interest from both payroll and HR professionals that want to be more immersed in the world of analytics. They actually are quite proactively looking to shift away potentially from the human side, shall I say, of HR. I don't mean that negatively, but actually into the data side of HR and or payroll. And there seems to be a real willingness to want to do that, and probably because of the impact it can have if leveraged correctly and powerfully. It can have a huge impact on bottom line performance and the wellness of your employees and so on and so forth. I think just from my own perspective, reading this Persona 3, the Insights Wizard, I think that resonated with me. I like it because someone once said to me, insight is sight from the inside. That's what it stands for, right? I think it gives a great opportunity to look at it. Sometimes we don't look at our business from the inside. We often look at it outside in. And this gives us a real good opportunity, if we get this right, to really see what's happening under the hood of our business, to have that sight from the inside, to be able to make meaningful change and meaningful impact. And yeah, I quite like that persona. So for those in audio only mode at the moment, I'm just going to expand a little bit on Jan's response with what the white paper gives us. So the pragmatic problem solver says it's your operational HR reports effectively describe what's happening at your organization in terms of workforce, planning, capacity, productivity, and so on. You can generate an overview of the plain facts and figures about the core domains of your choice through recruiting reports, attendance and absence reports, payroll reports, turnover, etc. So that's persona 1. Persona 2, the evidence-seeking detective. That's your HR and people data is properly structured and stored, and your operational reports are well managed and automated. You ensure data consolidation and aggregation seamlessly, enabling you to report across teams, departments, business units, or even countries of operations. The Insights Wizard, my favorite. You've already got a great deal of expertise in HR analytics. By combining data sources, you're addressing important strategic domains in a meaningful way. You're capable of inspiring your leadership and workforce with data-driven insights. You're successfully gathering and analyzing valuable data, albeit in a less automated way. And finally, the master strategist, where we all want to get to, which is you're highly competent in terms of HR data and analytics and can tackle key strategic issues in a data-driven way using technology and advanced analysis techniques. You provide impactful insights to your leadership team through advanced reports around topics such as the talent shortage, causes of work pressure, and disengagement. Now, the reason I highlight those, if you do download the report, of course, you can use these within your own business to try and see where you are in your journey, but also see where hopefully you want to get to within your businesses as well. So it gives you a really nice roadmap to follow. Fiona, are there any strategies you can recommend for transitioning from one data persona to the next, particularly in relation to how you, perhaps on your own journey, have had to enhance your own expertise, or how you've had to develop your internal technological infrastructures and so on?
I would say for us, it's been a kind of natural process, more so than something that's really deliberate. I guess one thing in my mind from the beginning was getting to the insights piece. Yes, we want to get to that strategic space, and yes, we want to make sure that we're influencing strategy through data. And we know we're not there yet necessarily, but for me, it was more about how do we get to true insights. So first, it was really work through this minefield of all the different data and get it into a much better place. But the key thing for me was, and so what does that mean? One of the things that I've been really conscious of is there is a real skill set when you talk about those personas and the people that will fit into that, around understanding data, being comfortable with data, knowing how to speak about people analytics. But there's a real part about developing your intuition, and intuition working alongside data for me is quite important here. So you're obviously using data to drive insight, but there is a skill set in terms of understanding the people function and using your intuition to go with that. That's been a strong skill set to hone as well. It's not just about facts and figures.
Yeah, fantastic. And how about yourself? Yeah, anything you'd like to add in terms of how, giving recommendations from your research for how people can move from one persona to the next and ensure that they're able to enhance their technological infrastructures along the way?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things is connecting the dots. So not connecting the data dots, but connecting the competence dots. We're looking at this at personas, and it may give the impression that this is about a person. And it can be, and we might have all these skill sets, finding them in one person. It's my experience in medium-sized, larger organizations. It's also sometimes connecting the dots where these specific competencies are, because like Fiona said, it has to do with intuition, which means that you have to understand the HR business, but not necessarily understanding the technical business. But you might have in your finance department someone who's good with Power BI, Microsoft Power BI, and so connecting the dots between the two of those makes actually sense. And you might have to get back to someone in the IT department who's good with the data to help you understand, or a cloud data warehouse specialist to better understand what it is. So these personas are also people that are developing their skills in connecting with others to get a better understanding of bringing different things together from a data perspective, an HR perspective, and so on, an analytical perspective, and actually going to make them grow. So in the first instance, it is connecting with other people that know things that you don't know, acquiring them, and then evolving in your function. But please be aware that at all times, there are people in the specific areas and sub areas that are big specialists that you still would need to connect with. Hence also the idea of externalizing or outsourcing parts of these functions for people that actually have these skill sets. But connecting the competence dots to better understand data, analytics, and the HR function is actually the most crucial thing in order to evolve towards a higher level of persona within the HR department, I guess.
Yeah, fantastic. So, I mean, hopefully today's webinars help demonstrate, number one, the crucial role HR and payroll teams, of course, who have access to data, can play in spearheading data initiatives and enhancing operational efficiency for organizations. For those that wanted more context to the white paper, it's worth noting that it was based on research that Jan's obviously pioneered and was at the forefront of, but it surveyed more than 4,000 HRDs across 14 countries, from SMEs up to enterprise level, so 3,000 plus employees, for a fully informed view of the state of analytics and to see just how prevalent use of HR data is in our organization. So this really is a very, very comprehensive study. So very much worth downloading that using the QR code you can see on your screen. You can also access it by going to sdworks.com and have a look at their fantastic resources they've got there as well. But I think you can still download previous white papers that link to the other 4 modules that we've done so far, this of course being number 4 of 5 in our foundation series. And hopefully as well today, we've shown you the necessity for, number 1, a patient and phased approach to data initiatives, and Jan was talking about there, and also Fiona, it's not just getting straight to the output, but making sure we evolve that process and get the foundations right, which is what this is all about. But also why it's absolutely critical that, if we get the foundation correct before we jump straight into predictive analytics, which I think is something that everyone probably wants to get to a little bit later on. I know it's something that Jan's very passionate about, but we need to get the foundations right first. Any closing remarks? Let me start with yourself, Fiona, that you'd like to add to our listeners and those in audio only at the moment that might help along their journey?
And not further to what you've said, Nick, I think you've summarised it well. It's about starting at the right place and taking it step by step and working towards that end goal, as opposed to just diving in and expecting it straight away. So you summarised it really well.
Fantastic. Any closing remarks from yourself, Jan?
Yeah, I think the key words, what you used, what Fiona used as well, it's a journey. You're planning a journey. It's not going to be finished in 6 months. Try to plan ahead and try to look at this as a journey that you'll be taking for the next 3 to 5 years, not being sure yet what the end is going to be, but at least scoping it into a year's perspective it's going to make a lot more sense. But you're embarking on a journey of at least 3 to 5 years if you're going on this journey.
Yeah, absolutely right. And of course, for those of you that, you know, have been frantically scribbling notes as we go, there will be a copy of this show that goes out post episode as well. You can also, of course, find this recording, which was, I believe, is going to be hosted on the SD Works website, and will also be released on the HR L&D podcast and the payroll podcast as well. So if you want to listen to it again or fast forward to something, in case you're worried you missed a key bit of insight from either Jan or Fiona, rest assured you can access it in various different formats post today's episode. But just leaves me to say a huge thank you to Jan Larson for joining me today as the expert from SD Works, and Fiona Campbell-Downs for joining me as well from as head of HR at AG Bar. It's been fantastic having you both here on the show, talking about the importance of HR data analytics, talking them through the journey to unlocking the power of HR data. It's been a pleasure. My name is Nick Day, and thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Fiona.
Thank you.